Greetings everyone, and welcome back to Lucas Brews. In today's video we're going to be building the diorama for the Focke-Wulf 190 crash that I have been working on. I've previously done a video on building the Focke-Wulf. Now I'll leave a list of the diorama products that I used for this video, some of which were actually given to me by one of the wholesalers for our hobby shop, Hobbies Australia. They've given me the products for free, but they haven't told me what I can and cannot say about them, so I'll be honest in my opinions. But anyways, let's get into building. I began creating the diorama by using a ruler and some scissors to cut some slices of styrofoam to create the bank of the river, and then I used a bit of PVA glue to glue them to a base of cardboard. After I'd finished cutting up and gluing the styrofoam, I used a vacuum cleaner to vacuum away all the waste. I created a tree for the top of the riverbank using some grapevines, which I removed some of the excess branches from, and then I stuck it into place. I used a cocktail stick to apply some Deluxe Material's Create and Shape foam to the upper surface of the styrofoam to help build up a nice smooth layer for the edges of the cliff. This stuff is a really good material to work with, and it can be easily thinned and smoothed out using an old brush and a little bit of water. You'll notice how on the one side I created a nice smooth and even terrain by even pouring a little bit of water to help it flow more naturally, while on the other side I used a cocktail stick and my brush to create some deep etched lines from the aircraft as it tore through the grass and ground. I then applied a nice even coat of Tamiya XF52 flat earth over the entire model to help create a nice base colour for applying dirt and rocks to. Once I was satisfied with the base coat of flat earth over the ground, I then applied some PVA glue by pouring it over to the top of the hill, and then I spread it using a cocktail stick over the entire model until I had a sort of relatively thin layer of PVA glue that was covering the entire ground. For the dirt layer, I used a bit of dirt that I found from my garden, and using a metal sieve, sieved it out to get some finer particles to sprinkle over the base of the diorama so that the grains were not too large. For the actual rocky riverbed I wanted to create, the size of the rocks needed to be a little bit more varied and also larger, so using some rocks I found, I sprinkled them by hand over the base of the model where I wanted the rocks to go. I did pick out a couple of larger ones and even used a little bit of UHU cold welding glue to help put in some of the larger rocks that I wanted in the riverbed. I did have a couple of extra rocks that I glued to some of the higher parts of the hill face just to create a little bit of variety in the terrain so it wasn't all just grass. Since I haven't done many dioramas, I didn't have a grass applicator, so I decided to instead experiment with using some Glad wrap with a few holes poked in it and a small container to help spread the grass fibres. I applied some PVA glue to the areas where I wanted the grass and attempted to shake the mixture onto the surface, but I found it was incredibly slow and it was easier to sort of sprinkle the fibres onto the surface of the terrain. To give the terrain a nice natural look, I used various shades of grass fibres to create the grass textures, and I also applied some special mixtures of some grass fibres and some wood chippings that a friend of mine gave me to create some areas where there were some fallen leaves. I also sprinkled a few small rocks and a mix of grass to help create some small pebbles hidden in the terrain, and once the first layer of grass had set, I then also sprinkled on a few extra little bits of scatter that were a darker shade to create some weeds and variety in the grass. The final step of the grass was to add a few tufts for some extra variety and height in the grass, and then I glued the Focke-Wulf 190 to the base of the diorama using a little bit of Deluxe Material's super glue. Once the aircraft was secure in place, I then used a little bit of Vallejo's mud and grass effects to add a build-up of ploughed earth where the aircraft had crashed, and also on the left side of the wing, which would have gone through the ground a little bit and gotten built up with mud and grass, and along some small areas on the side of the aircraft. To apply the mud and grass effects, I used a cocktail stick and dragged it over the sides of the aircraft and over the terrain and the parts of the plane where I wanted the effects to be. Once it had dried a little bit, I then got some of the smaller parts, which I had purposely not glued to the aircraft since they had broken off, and then I glued them to the base of the terrain and put a little bit of mud and grass effects to cover them to create the effects of them coming off and getting slightly buried in the terrain as the aircraft crashed. The mud and grass definitely helped blend the aircraft into the terrain and make it look like it was part of the environment and had an impact on it when it had its crash. I then glued the cowlings into place after giving them a little bit of weathering themselves, and then I used a few layers of Tamiya masking tape to create a dam around the edges of the riverbed for when I added my water. I found that the Tamiya dam worked pretty well, however my choice of cardboard as a base for the diorama would come back to haunt me a little bit in this respect. The final step before it was time to add the water effects was to glue in the ground crew, since some of them would be partially underwater and I wanted some of them to be standing in the riverbed and hauling some of the parts out of it. The ground crew was sourced from the Airfix Luftwaffe ground set, which is quite a nice little set of figures, and I also had a spare German infantryman also from an Airfix set and a pilot. I didn't show painting the Luftwaffe ground crew, but I did show painting both the German soldier and a little bit of the pilot. For painting the figures, I generally start with the main colour of their clothing and use a relatively large brush to apply it, and then I paint the smaller areas of the figure using the various colours needed, using a much finer brush, neatening up any mistakes I make as I go, and once all of the paint has been applied, I will then apply some Tamiya panel liner accent, usually the black colour, to help highlight their details and add a little bit of shading to them. The pilot I painted with grey pants, a black flying helmet, and a sort of leathery brown jacket, while the infantryman I gave the standard German grey kind of coloured uniform for his clothing, and a more late war 3-coloured camouflage for his helmet. Getting back to the diorama, I used a little bit of Deluxe Material's Aqua Magic to start to build up the water levels in the riverbed. This was probably a little bit of a mistake in choosing products, but I will talk a bit about that later. I basically began by applying a layer of around about 5mm deep of the still water and then leaving it for 24 hours to settle and then dry. Whilst waiting for it to dry, I moved on to creating the tree for the top of the hill, which I made out of using a grapevine and gluing a little bit of dried moss to the branches to create some extra depth and some extra branches for the foliage to cling to, and once that had dried I applied some spray adhesive over the entire tree branch, and then I dipped it in a little packet of some scatter material and some foliage to create the leaves. I gave it about 2 or 3 coats of the spray adhesive and then a dunk in the leaves, and eventually I built up a relatively nice layer for the trees. I found, however, though, while it took me a while to make this model and I'd been moving it around a little bit to work on it, some of the foliage later came off, but I simply glued it back on with some PVA at a later date. I then superglued the tree to the base and moved back to adding some extra layers of Aqua Magic. I also at this stage applied some Aqua Magic to the areas where the mud and grass were to create a wet effect as if the mud was relatively fresh. To do this, I basically poured it over the areas where the mud was and then used a cocktail stick to help it get into some of the areas. After a third and final layer of Aqua Magic, I then removed the masking tape, carefully peeling it away, and when it had adhered a little bit too much to the masking tape using a Stanley knife to remove the mask and the excess still water had been removed, I had a pretty nice result, I thought. The water looked pretty clear, it was nice and flat and even on the surface, and you could see through it on the sides, which was the effect I was going for. I then added a little bit of Deluxe Material's Making Waves using a cocktail stick to create some of the more gentle ripples and wave effects on the surface of the river to make it look a little bit more realistic. I found the Making Waves product was pretty easy to use, it didn't really smell, and as you'll see in the end I got a pretty nice surface effect for the river. While waiting for it to dry, I applied some Vallejo Weathering Effects Wet Effect to the sides of the aircraft and some of the areas which were slightly more covered in mud to create a fresh and kind of wet and dirty look from the aircraft when it had the mud and stuff splashed onto it. It helped to blend it a little bit more into the terrain, and I think the result is subtle but still pretty nice. I also added it to the areas where some of the dirt was to make it look like it was a bit more fresh and like it had been splattered. For the sides of the diorama, I wanted to add some balsa panels to make it look a little bit neater. Unfortunately, because I'd used a sort of bubbly polystyrene packaging, it was a bit hard to sand it flat, so the balsa did not stick very well to the sides of the model, and it also wasn't very smooth and flush. It still looked a bit better than nothing, and I also used a little bit of filler later on to fill in some of the gaps. While waiting for it to dry, I then glued down my pilot and the German infantrymen at the top of the hill, which was the final thing to add to the diorama. Once the balsa wood was nice and dry, I then used my Stanley knife to cut away some of the excess balsa wood, and then I painted all of the balsa Vallejo flat black using a bit of water to help thin it down and spread it across the sides of the diorama. I chose black because it was a nice dark colour which meant it could hide some of the seams and the gaps with the balsa, and it also looks quite nice as a frame for the lighter colours of the terrain. And once the flat black had been applied, the diorama was finally completed. So on the whole, I was pretty happy with what I managed to achieve. I don't do a lot of dioramas because I tend to prefer to have the aircraft and the tanks available to do videos with them for animations and that sort of thing. So having them stuck to a piece of diorama is a little bit inconvenient. However, in this case, I really wanted to try something different, and it was a lot of fun to do this, especially to beat up the aircraft and then consider how the terrain would be affected by its accident, and helping blending it in. That was definitely one of my favourite stages. And I do like to mess around with grass. I think it's a lot of fun, and even though I don't have a grass applicator, I was still pretty happy with the result. As for the other diorama effects I used, such as the still water, as you can see on the edges of the diorama, it sort of ended up spilling over and it didn't hold its shape. Now, I don't believe there's any issue with the still water effects. I believe it was just a little bit of a rookie mistake and misusing of the diorama product. What I should have used was a 2-part resin epoxy, which sets harder and can be used to build up deeper layers of water, whereas the still water is more designed for effects such as puddles and much shallower water that's got something to hold its shape. It still did a pretty good job, and I don't really mind that it's a little bit uneven on the edges. I did want it to be sharper and create more of a clean border. If I was going to do another water diorama, I'd also probably not use cardboard as a base, because the still water did manage to get through some of the PVA and the rocks and saturate the cardboard and cause a couple of leaks. Eventually it sort of plugged itself after the second or third layer. However, I did lose a little bit of still water to that process, and yeah, it's not ideal. Also, the styrofoam that I used, which was general packaging styrofoam, is easy to get. However, it's not the best quality, and something like a hot wire cutter would have been better to use rather than just a ruler and a pair of scissors to cut it up, so that I could have got a nice and smooth corner and edge for the balsa wood to apply, so it wasn't all awkward and patchy. But that's all mistakes to learn from. And if you're interested in having a go at a diorama like this, I would highly recommend you grab some diorama products and just have a go at it. This hobby really is about having a lot of fun and experimenting, in my opinion, and you're not always going to get everything perfectly right. And it's fun to just have a little try at this sort of thing. So if you're interested in it, definitely recommend you learn from some of my mistakes and also just get in and have a go yourself. Thank you very much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it, even if it was to learn from some of my mistakes. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to leave a like, and if you have any questions or future suggestions for videos and how I could have improved on this one, be sure to leave it down in the comment section below. And a big shout out, as always, to my wonderful patrons for helping me fund this video and many others, and also a big thank you to Hobbies Australia for giving me these products to have a little play around with. Anyways, thank you very much again, and until the next video, model on!